November 24th, 1943, 2:17 a.m., a narrow strip of jungle and volcanic sand known as Betio Island, Tarawa Atoll, Gilbert Islands. The tide sat at 1.8 feet, the air temperature measured 87 degrees, and the wind pushed a constant 14 knots from the east, carrying the smell of salt water, burned cordite, and rotting vegetation across a battlefield that had already swallowed more than 3,000 men in the last 72 hours. Private First Class Daniel "Danny" Hale, age 20, farm-raised from a town of 412 people outside of Boone, Iowa, lay face down in a shallow shell crater, no wider than a kitchen table, separated from his platoon by 1.3 miles of open sand and interlocking Japanese bunkers. His M1 Garand was wedged under his chest. His left boot was missing. His leg burned like a branding iron. Around him, shapes moved in the dark, low and fast, circling like sharks in shallow water. By dawn, the Marines had already counted 642 dead, and Danny Hale, alone in the center of a shrinking island, knew he would be next. He had landed 52 hours earlier, November 21st, at 8:32 a.m., when the ramps of the Higgins boats dropped into water that was supposed to be waist-deep but instead hit coral reef at 600 yards from shore. Men jumped into 4 feet of water under machine gun fire. Some went under and never came back up. The planners had predicted a 6-hour fight. By the end of the first day, the casualty rate had hit 40%. Out of 18,000 Marines who hit the beach, more than 4,000 would be dead or wounded before Tarawa fell. The island itself was only 2,900 yards long and 800 yards wide. A man could walk across it in under 30 minutes, but every inch had been turned into a killing ground. Danny had enlisted at January 3rd, 1943, after finishing a half-day shift at the grain elevator in Boone. He had stood in line with 23 other boys from 3 counties, signed his name in block letters, and told the sergeant he wanted the Marines because they finished fights faster. He trained at Camp Pendleton for 12 weeks. He learned to field strip an M1 in 47 seconds. He ran 5 miles every morning. He learned how to throw a Mark II fragmentation grenade and count to 4 before it exploded. He learned the names of the men who would stand next to him in a firefight. Corporal Thomas Redding, 24, from Dayton, Ohio. PFC Luis Martinez, 21, from El Paso, Texas. Sergeant Frank "Red" O'Donnell, 27, from Boston, Massachusetts. By November, 2 of those names would be written on crosses made from rifle stocks. Tarawa mattered because it was the first test, the first American assault on a heavily fortified Japanese island. The planners needed to know if the strategy would work before moving on to the Marshalls, the Marianas, and eventually Japan itself. The Japanese commander, Rear Admiral Keiji Shibasaki, had 4,836 men on Betio. He told Tokyo, "It will take 1 million men 100 years to take Tarawa." He built 500 bunkers. He installed 14 coastal defense guns, some as large as 8-inch naval cannons. He buried tanks in sand and turned them into pillboxes. Every approach lane overlapped with another. There was no safe path. On the second night, Danny's squad was ordered to move inland 600 yards from the beach to clear a cluster of bunkers near the island's narrow airstrip. The map showed 3 positions. The reality was a maze of trenches, spider holes, and concrete domes with firing slits no wider than a man's hand. At 11:43 p.m., a flare went up. It turned the jungle white. A Type 92 heavy machine gun opened from the left, then another from the right. The first man in line, Redding, took a round in the throat and dropped without a sound. Martinez tried to pull him back and caught a burst across the chest. O'Donnell dragged Danny into a crater as grenades started falling, 1 every 3 seconds, each explosion punching the ground like a hammer. By 12:18 a.m., the squad was down to 3 men. By 12:25, O'Donnell was hit in the leg and couldn't move. He handed Danny his last full clip, 8 rounds. He told him to run. Danny didn't. He fired until the bolt locked back. He threw 2 grenades. Then a third one landed inside the crater and didn't go off. The fourth one did. When Danny came back to himself, he couldn't hear out of his right ear. Blood filled his mouth. His left leg was shredded below the knee. He dragged himself 40 feet into a deeper hole as voices started moving closer. Japanese infantry, 7.7mm Arisaka rifles, bayonets fixed. He pressed his face into the mud and didn't breathe. One of them kicked his shoulder. Another rolled him over. He went limp. They moved on. Hour 1 of 9. The temperature dropped to 79 degrees. Mosquitoes swarmed his face. He could feel the wet sand under his cheek, the copper taste of blood on his tongue, the slow leak of his own leg soaking into the crater. He could hear the island breathing, gunfire in bursts, a flamethrower whoosh followed by screaming, the distant thump of naval guns from ships 3 miles offshore. Every 5 minutes, someone walked past him. He didn't move. At 3:10 a.m., a patrol stopped 10 feet away. 3 men, one squatted. He lit a cigarette. The smell drifted over. He tapped ash into the sand. Danny stared at the ember, 2 feet from his face, and counted his heartbeats. 112 per minute. He told himself he would die if he swallowed. He didn't swallow. At 4:47 a.m., a wounded Marine crawled into the edge of his crater. He whispered for water. Danny couldn't answer. The man bled out in 12 minutes. Danny felt the body go cold against his arm. Hour 3. When the sky started to lighten at 5:32 a.m., the shapes around him became numbers. He could count them now. Japanese soldiers moving in groups of 4 and 5. A heavy machine gun being set up 30 yards away. A stack of grenades piled next to a trench. He reached under his chest and felt the cold steel of his Garand. He had 1 clip left, 8 rounds. He had a Colt M1911 with 2 magazines, 14 rounds each. He had 1 MK2 grenade in his pocket. He waited until the sun cleared the palm trees at 6:01 a.m. The first 8 men were in a trench, backs to him, loading ammunition. He rolled onto his good side, shouldered the rifle, and fired. 8 shots, 8 bodies. The machine gun crew turned. He drew the pistol and fired until the slide locked. He crawled forward, dragged himself through sand that burned his hands, and threw the grenade into the trench. The blast lifted 3 men out of it and dropped them back in pieces. That was when they saw him. They came from everywhere, from behind sand berms, from concrete bunkers, from holes in the ground, rifles cracking, bullets snapping past his head. He pulled O'Donnell's clip from his pocket, slammed it into the rifle, and fired at shapes. 1, 2, 3. He switched to the pistol again. He emptied the second magazine into a group running across open sand. 5 fell. The rest hit the ground. Hour 4. A round hit him in the shoulder and spun him into the crater. Another cut across his scalp. He pressed his helmet down and crawled deeper, dragging his dead leg behind him. They threw grenades. 1 landed in the lip of the crater and went off. Shrapnel tore into his back. He couldn't feel his left arm anymore. He pressed his face into the sand and didn't move. They thought he was dead again. They moved past him, 20 of them, heading toward the beach. He waited until their backs were turned. He lifted the rifle with his right hand and fired into the group. 3 dropped. He fired again, 2 more. The rifle clicked empty. He dropped it, drew the pistol, and kept shooting until it was empty. He crawled forward and took another man's rifle from the ground. By 8:30 a.m., he had counted 23. The sun climbed. The temperature hit 94 degrees. His mouth felt like it was full of sand. He drank from a canteen he found next to a body. The water tasted like rust. He didn't care. He pressed a field dressing against his leg and tied it off with a bootlace. At 9:12 a.m., a group of 12 moved down a trench line toward him. He waited until they were within 15 yards. He fired until the magazine was empty. He threw 2 grenades he took from a dead man's belt. The trench filled with smoke and noise and pieces of wood and metal. When it cleared, 8 of them didn't move. 4 crawled. He finished them with the pistol. By 10 a.m., he had reached 35. He could hear American voices now, far off, maybe 400 yards. A Marine squad pushing inland. He tried to stand. His leg collapsed. He fell back into the sand. The world went grey at the edges. Hour 7. They came again, this time in a rush. 15 men, shouting, firing from the hip. He fired back from the ground. He took 1 in the chest, another in the side. The flak jacket stopped the first. The second went through. He rolled into a shallow depression and pulled the pin on his last grenade. He held it for 3 seconds and threw it into the middle of them. The blast dropped 6. He fired the last of the pistol rounds. 3 more fell. He crawled toward a fallen Marine and took his BAR, the heavy automatic rifle, still loaded. He braced it on the sand and squeezed the trigger. The recoil hammered his shoulder. The gun walked across the group. 3 more went down. By the time the BAR clicked empty, he had reached 47. Hour 9. At 11:26 a.m., an American flamethrower team came over a berm and froze. They saw him in the sand, covered in blood and dust, holding an empty gun. They thought he was Japanese at first. He raised his hand. He said his name. He passed out. He woke up on a stretcher, the smell of antiseptic, a corpsman cutting his clothes off. They counted the wounds. 1 in the shoulder, 1 in the side, 2 in the scalp, shrapnel in the back, a leg nearly severed. He went into surgery at 12:04 p.m. They gave him 18 units of plasma. They tied off an artery. They cleaned sand out of his chest. Tarawa fell the next day, November 25th. Out of the 4,836 Japanese defenders, only 146 were taken alive. Danny spent 11 months in hospitals. He learned to walk with a brace. He learned to sleep without waking up screaming. He went home to Boone in October 1944. The town of 412 people threw a parade. They named a street after him. The Marine Corps awarded him the Navy Cross on March 12, 1945. His citation listed the number 47. He married his high school sweetheart, Mary Collins, in 1947. They had 3 children. He worked at the same grain elevator he left at 19, now with a limp and a scar that ran from his ear to his collarbone. He never talked about Tarawa until his grandson asked him, in 1989, what the worst day of his life was. He said, "The day I decided I wasn't done yet." Daniel Hale died on June 14, 2003, at age 80, in a hospital 30 miles from where he was born. He left behind 7 grandchildren and a town that still tells his story. Out of the millions who fought in the Pacific, only a handful ever survived 9 hours alone behind enemy lines, wounded, outnumbered, and surrounded. He was one of them. If you want to see how one farm boy from Iowa lived through a morning that should have killed him before sunrise, hit that like button. It helps us keep these stories alive. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Danny. Every year on November 24th, the flag on Hale Street in Boone goes up at 2:17 a.m., the same time he lay in the sand on an island half a world away. His daughter once said he never believed he was brave. He believed he was stubborn. He outlived the war by 58 years. He outlived most of the men he trained with. He carried their names in a wallet until the day he died. Yeah. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. You're not just a viewer. You're part of keeping these memories alive.